see where it takes us, then we can always
We'll see
go
what
off.
it takes. We can just hit record and then.
Okay, so you want to start with the quote then, don't you?
Right. So I'll get this all up. Right. So yeah, it was the quote from Seneca. So Seneca's letters to Lucilius. He sent like, I don't know, 60, 70 letters to Lucilius. And this one in particular that I was looking at this morning was the idea of the God within us rather than the God above. So what Seneca was saying is, don't pray to the gods and say, give me what I want, like give me this new car, give me this, give me that. But the idea is more, pray to have the strength in yourself to either not want these things if you can't have them, or to go and get them yourself through your own work. And almost the idea of constructing your own life yourself and not relying on a god or deity to give you the strength that you need to carry on in life. Like, what do you think of that? Do you agree with it?
So I agree with that. I mean, I am an atheist, but I agree with that because I feel like having that attitude of putting all our kind of fate in the hands of a god is just kind of outsourcing our responsibility. And it also means that we don't have to like work hard. There's a lot of people who say, well, it's, you know, a lot of people who are poor, for example, they say, oh, there's nothing I can do. There's, you know, I can't do anything to get myself out of this cycle of poverty. My family's always been poor. It always will be. That's almost kind of the same kind of mentality of outsourcing your problems to fate. And there is some element of fate in our lives. Like, we're born into a certain circumstance. We have families with certain mentalities. We have, obviously, I'm only 5'10", so I can't grow to 6'2".
Right.
There's certain things that are determined, but that we have a lot of agency within that. And I feel like that's what Seneca is getting at here. He's basically saying that we don't have to rely on a deity. We can rely on ourselves and our actions, because that's what the Stoics talked about. They talked about how our actions are, if our actions are good, then our character will be good and our purpose and our destiny will be good. That's what the Stoics believed.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the example of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, another Stoic, obviously Marcus Aurelius was the emperor, they talked a lot about practicing poverty, because what you were talking about poverty there, saying that poverty is not the be all and end all. If in certain situations, obviously excluding like very severe types of poverty, there's obviously levels to this, and the threshold is decided, and some have more luxuries than others. But Seneca is a very wealthy man in Rome, and Marcus Aurelius obviously very wealthy, but they practiced activities such as sleeping on the floor, nibbling on bread as the only source of food for days on end, and practicing poverty to realize that it's not the worst thing in the world that can happen to you. And obviously that's easy for potentially for them to say or for us to say, but it is a good question of whether, should people who are poor, does praying to the gods make any difference whether they're poor or not? Even if you're an atheist or a theist or an agnostic and you believe in God, does it make any difference if you're praying to the God, or should you find the God within you to either improve your situation or to accept your situation, which is really the only two options you have? I think I don't like the idea of praying to the gods simply because it's like a demanding thing. It's like you're demanding more rights. You're demanding this, that, or the other, when we know for a fact that nature is a very cruel mistress when it wants to be, and there's tsunamis and there's horrible things happen in the world. But is it our responsibility for us to pray for that not to happen, even though it's been happening for thousands of years? Or is it our responsibility to think, look, this is happening. This is the game we're playing. This is the chessboard. I can move my pieces around it in accordance with the board, or I can try and flip the board and moan about the game itself. But that won't help. Like, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. And the best example I can think of that is that God won't save you. And the irony is that if you look at some of the mass shootings that happen in America, some of them are in churches where people are praying.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Isn't that a great irony?
Yeah, that's the thing. And if you do believe in a God, which I wouldn't discount,
I think this is what the Stoics said. They said that God is indifferent to our fate. They talked about, they were completely, and like our fate, like the world doesn't care about our fate. The world is completely indifferent to us. The only things that aren't indifferent that aren't indifferent are people, our friends, our families, ourselves. So and obviously God is a kind of metaphysical entity. It doesn't, it's not physical. It doesn't care. I mean, obviously, if you're religious, you believe that God isn't indifferent to you. But the Stoics certainly believe that that's why your actions need to be good and not rely on fate and not rely on a God, because he doesn't actually care about your fate. And if you rely on him, then you're going to be in trouble.
Well, the argument is as well, you can have a God that's indifferent, but it doesn't mean that the God's evil. This is an argument that's like the idea that God's, if there is one, I can't prove it. No one here can prove if there is or isn't one. So we'll go with the idea that there might be potentially a God. We don't know. But what we can say is that if there is a God and he's up there as a spiritual form floating around, he's not banking on you. He hasn't got any bets on your survival or anything like that. We know through Darwinism and evolutionary theory that it is survival of the fittest in this planet. And that's how it goes. So yes, to an extent, you can believe in a God and a spiritual thing. And I almost believe in karma as a product of your actions as well. So
why do you believe in karma though?
Because your karma.
And do you believe in karma because of a God? A God gives you this karma, or do you believe that good actions just produce good outcomes?
I believe you create your own karma. Yeah. Because the thing is, we've all got different situations in life. And I think the worst thing that you can do is sit on the side when you're in a disadvantaged position and criticize the idea of almost improving your situation. Because although it's hard, and I'm not saying my life's like hard at all compared to other people, it's probably a lot easier than a lot of other people's life. But we're all given what we're given. We're dealt a hand, as Marcus Aurelius would say, like play the hand that fate dealt you and play it with a smile on your face, because no matter what comes out of your life, you know that you can't fundamentally change the genetics of the hand, for example, or you can't change certain things about your situation, but your actions can breed change, which is a law of the universe in itself. So to think that everything is going to be this way forever and that we'll get results through prayer, I think could be a misconception. Marcus Aurelius actually says in the Meditations, which is a real surprise to hear this kind of quote coming from a Roman emperor thousands of years ago. He says, don't pray to sleep with the girl. He literally says this. Pray for the desire to not sleep with her. And it's almost the idea of, or don't pray that your child doesn't die. Pray for the strength to deal with it if it does happen. And it sounds cruel, it sounds remorseless, but that is the world and that is how it turns. And obviously in the past, in Rome, like mortality rates were really high.
Well, so. Yeah, exactly. Well, I feel like that's one of the reasons we're losing touch with reality a bit, is because we've all got this technology. We've got, the mortality rates have reduced significantly since Marcus Aurelius's time. So we become a bit distanced from, the reality life can serve up. And also, like, if you look at the pandemic we've all been immersed in the past year, it's kind of brought us back to those primitive roots, because people have been dying in front of us and we've seen it on the news. And it's almost like a shock. And this is what the Stoics preach. I did a video on this, negative visualization. I know you practice this. Yes. And what obviously Epictetus taught us and Seneca is that we need to visualize the worst possible outcome in any situation. And that means that if that situation ever arises, we're not surprised, because from my experience, the worst experiences of my life is when I haven't accounted for something bad happening, when I thought it's just going to go swimmingly. Yeah. That's when I've had, panic attacks. That's when I've been completely, phased. And if you think, yes, my grandparents could die in the next few years, and that's something I'm going to have to deal with. I know that that's going to happen, and it could happen tomorrow, or it could happen to, my parents. If we can account for that in our minds, when it happens, obviously it's going to be shocking. And the thing about philosophy is that it's not a way of numbing the pain. People seem to think that philosophy can cure all your pain, mental pain. It can't. But what philosophy does is gives you clarity, and clarity does numb the pain. It doesn't eradicate the pain, but it certainly gives you a better perspective. And as you know, when we have a good perspective, our actions will follow in a positive way. So when something does bad happen, when something that happens that we can account for, we won't spend years dwelling on it. We'll react accordingly, because we'll have a plan in our minds.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I was really interested with what you said about philosophy, because the idea of it not being a cure, but being a defense mechanism. I like to see philosophy as having like an arsenal of weapons in your room or in your house that you can use to defend against the brutalities of whenever they come. So what Seneca actually says in this letter is he goes on to say, look, the person who reads philosophy every day is the true trainer in life, because by reading it every day, you're so much more likely to deal with what is thrown at you, and it may never come. Like your fears may never come. And he also says, don't bother like worrying about things in advance before they come into fruition. He says, only deal with it when it faces you head on. And that's the thing. I think praying's almost a form of, going back to that original point, praying's almost a form of like catastrophizing things, because some would say it's like cruel and heartless to look at life this way. But is there any other way to look at it? Like there's two schools of thought, really. There's kind of like optimistic pessimism, which is a juxtaposition in itself, but that is Stoicism. It's optimistic because it's the idea we can face this, but then it's pessimistic because it's saying the world is this uncaring place. But then there's people out there who are saying the world is a caring place. I'll just get that light back on. Hold on.
So yeah, no. So I think a lot of people I think there's a thing called toxic positivity. You can be toxic and positive at the same time. It's not just the people who, and the thing is, as humans, we have a negative bias. It's so much easier to moan about something than find a solution. That's why the majority of people moan, because our brains naturally look for things that are wrong so that we can improve and increase our survival chances. But it's so much harder to be positive. So we naturally associate positivity with positivity as, being a good thing. But positivity can be a bad thing, because if you completely turn a blind eye to the negative elements of life, as Jordan Peterson talks about, you need to accept the tragedy of life. If you don't do that, though, you'll be completely knocked off your perch when something does happen. So sometimes being negative is a positive thing.
So which is paradoxical. Ignorance is bliss. And some people would argue that Stoicism's toxic. You should live this kind of lifestyle where you don't worry about these things. Some people would say that the idea of premeditatio malorum, which you're talking about, the idea of premeditating or contemplating bad things happen to you, is a bit sick. What would you respond to that?
It's not sick, because when those evils do occur, you'll feel more sick then.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
True. And like, would you say that it's going back to the pessimistic versus optimism? Would you say that it's
a balance? It's a balancing act. You shouldn't be pessimistic all the time. That's the good thing about the Stoics. They were flexible in their ideology. They weren't dogmatic. They were very they didn't just say be negative, visualize negative things. They also said, look, be grateful. And that's why Stoicism is such a holistic ideology, because it covers everything. And it's not just one attitude. It says amor fati, you need to accept everything, the good and the bad in life. And that's why it's such an effective tool in our lives.
So we've talked about the idea of death as well, and the idea of inevitabilities.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who said to you right now, look, you and Tom, you're talking about these things that you might not have had huge experiences with. How can you sit there and say, my grandma's on the deathbed, this is okay? How can you say that? Like, is that immoral of you? Is that emotionless? That's what some people would say.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one thing that, just touching on a point you made before, everyone experiences, tragedy in their lives. That's just the human condition. So, there's no one, even though there's levels of suffering, everyone suffers. And we've talked about this before, like pick your poison. But so you're saying it's quite cynical saying that's okay that my grandma's going to die.
Do you think that's the distinction there? Because when I see it, I think people misinterpret Stoicism to think it's emotionless people. But what I see it as is mastery of your emotions. So not being emotionless, because that's inhumane. We all have emotions. But it's the idea of, can you master your emotions? And here's where it comes into practice. Okay, say, for example, we're going back into another morbid topic here, but this is a fact of life, so we have to discuss it. One of your relatives on the deathbed, for example, what's better, to break down and be ruined emotionally by that experience and then have years and years of trauma, and then have the people around you, your friends and your family, are sucked into the trauma with you and brought down into your kind of like miserable mindset? Or is it better to gain mastery of your emotions, to have almost premeditated these things, and then when it does come, you can be a rock for your friends and your family, and you can sit there and you can help them get through this obstacle, as Marcus Aurelius would say, the obstacle is the way, and grab the obstacle head on and think, I'm not going to let this break me. I'm going to grow from this in this experience. And that's another question. Do you think it is kind of sick or morbid to say, I'm going to grow from this negative experience? Or do you think that's the only way to go forward?
I think being weak is not a virtue.
Yeah, definitely.
I think there's a quote, be the strongest person at your mum's funeral. And that's strong. And if you emote just for the sake of emoting, that's the Stoics denounce. They say you shouldn't emote for the sake of emoting. You need to be ready. You need to be practical. As humans, we need to be practical. We need to be pragmatic, because, there's no utility in being miserable for the rest of your life. If I died tomorrow, I wouldn't want my family to dwell about my life and not live their own lives.
This is it. That's exactly it. The idea of, would your family members want you to mourn for years on end? Or would they want you to be up all night crying? Would they want that? And the answer is no, because the fact of life is, we're all going to experience these things, as you said. So we need to hit them with a strong mind. And that's going back to this prayer and the idea of moving your responsibilities away. I think prayer, if you do it in that way, where you're praying to the gods and not taking any action yourself, you're getting rid of the personal responsibility. And I think the modern world, as you said, is a big cause of this, because our responsibility is entirely removed. We expect from a young age nowadays to have a really cushy life. Like phones, for a lot of us, phones are thrown on our laps at a young age. Money, food, we get all these luxuries that in the past, let's say a few thousand years ago, let's go back to Roman, Greek times, that kind of opportunity was not there for the majority of people. But we live in this very cushy society now. It's almost a curse. It's a blessing in many ways, because people get all these luxuries and they can have this great life in some regards. But then it's a curse, because when the brutal fact of life does smack you in the face, it hits like a bulldozer. And in the past, when you knew the nature of the beast, it would have been a lot easier to stomach the facts of life, because what was the infant mortality rate back then in ancient Greece and Rome? The majority of people would die.
Marcus Aurelius lost 5 of his 11 children. And he's an emperor, and he had access to all these resources that peasants didn't have access to. And he lost nearly half of his children. And he's an emperor. And one thing I will say is that the problem with the reason people a lot of the time don't agree with Stoicism, or they see it as some abstract kind of religion almost. They think that Marcus Aurelius, they think that Seneca, these people are godly. They think that they're higher creatures, when in reality they're not. And Seneca said, let us also produce some bold act of our own. He talked about, if philosophy just for philosophizing is purposeless, we're not learning about Seneca and Marcus Aurelius to do a biography. We're trying to find their virtues, their actions, and follow them, because that's what philosophy is for. It's not for observing the history. It's for using these actions to improve our own lives.
Exactly.
And that's what I like. Embodying philosophy is the reason, and that's why we're both doing our channels. And we're talking about the fact that our minds are becoming softer by each generation. And I've learned a lot about this, because my channel is all about anxiety, and I've learned that since 1994, the rates of anxiety have gone up by, I think, 10%, which is absolutely ridiculous. And anxiety, and the reason for that is because, and you'd think, why is that? The standards of living are going up, with better healthcare, better security, we're more prosperous. That doesn't make sense. But it's because of that we become completely detached from the tragedies of life. We become so comfortable. And Epictetus talked about voluntary discomfort, and that's what we're both trying to do. We're trying to put ourselves in an uncomfortable position so that we are stronger mentally.
So would you agree that the reason for this shift and people actually getting more mentally unwell is because we're shirking our responsibilities? Because I believe quite strongly that the life is to bear a weight, as Jordan Peterson said, and carry it with courage and with conviction. Do you think that luxury is softening people up? Ryan Holiday said, great times are great softeners. And Marcus Aurelius said in the Meditations, when you wake up each morning, you've got to do your human work, your work as a human being. And your work as a human being is not to be pampered and massaged in bed, or to sit in your bed and read a comic book all day. Because if that was your work as a human being thousands of years ago, you'd be dead within minutes. Because the brutal fact of nature is, out in the wild, caveman times, going back to that the law of the nature rules. So if you're this kind of person who's not getting up to your responsibilities and looking after your body, your mental health, your family, your friends, keeping your diet clean, do you think that that's selfish in a way, not just to yourself, but to other people around you? Because you're almost bringing them down with your lower energy. Could that be said, or do you think that's too harsh?
100%, I think it is. I think obviously everyone trips up at some point in their lives, and I'm not saying because I've suffered mental health problems before, and I'm not saying that you're a weak person, that you're the opposite. But it's about, if you could, and there's a good quote, and it's like, when your philosophy leaves you, it's always there to pick right up again. And I feel like we do have a duty to our friends and our family. And if we're not trying, it's about trying. It's about the effort you put in. It's about being the best version of yourself. It's not being Marcus Aurelius. It's not being a king. It's about aspiring to be a better version of yourself. And if you're not aspiring to do that, if you're happy and content in the condition that you're in now, you're failing your family. And I agree with you. I think we have a duty to serve those around us, and a duty to ourselves. Jordan Peterson talks about we need to treat ourselves like someone we're supposed to be careful, because a lot of the time we treat our pets better than we treat ourselves. We take them to the vets, we feed them well, but we don't even eat well ourselves. We don't go to the doctors when we're ill. We have a complete disdain towards ourselves. And I think the most important thing in life is self-respect. And if you don't work hard and live your purpose, you're not just failing yourself, you're failing your family, because when they need you, you're not going to be there, because you're going to be mentally all over the place.
So would you say that, I'd say in the modern times, there's this almost a campaign against tough love. I would say that the majority of people nowadays think it's almost like a cursed topic or a cursed word to say tough love, and the words discipline as well are really frowned upon. Like you see kind of posters around, like mental health posters in the UK. There's one which says it's okay to not be okay. What do you think of that concept of it's okay to not be okay? Because there's a few dynamics to this I want to get into. I think the first thing is, of course, it's okay to not be okay sometimes and to deal with that. But if you're not okay all the time, are we normalizing, like allowing mental health to flourish? And are we normalizing saying you've got no control over this? Like, as in, you've been dealt this hand of mental health issues. You've been dealt this problem. You should just fucking lie down and do this or that. Because I've spoken to a lot of people through making the Modern Stoic channel who've gone through a lot of things, like some individuals who've had PTSD from like war times, who've developed like serious mental health conditions. And what they do is they breathe through it. They do the Wim Hof breathing technique. They go out and they do runs. They eat well. They get responsibility over their families, and they fight through it. So that I don't think they'd say it's okay to not be okay. I think they'd say it's not okay to not be okay. Like, what do you think of that? Is that a harsh perspective of the world? Is that cruel?
I think, as you said, it's okay not to be okay sometimes. Like, we all trip up. But if you're continually making the same mistakes over and over again, the definition of insanity is repeating the same mistakes over and over again. Mistakes are there to be learned from. And I find it hard to be sympathetic towards people who are causing their own misfortune. And they're aware. The people who are oblivious, that's a different story. The people who do not realize that they're causing their own harm, then that's a different story. But when people are conscious of the fact they're doing something wrong and they're not seeking to improve their lives in any way, then it's not okay to be okay. It's torture. It's actual torture. Why would you want to torture yourself? Why would you want to torture your family? And I saw a really good quote, and it was something along the lines of, when you're stabbed in the back, it's not the people you bleed on is your family. It's not the person who stabbed you who you bleed on. So they deal with the repercussions. So if you don't attend to those wounds, then you're just going to drive everyone else around you insane, and you can isolate yourself.
Well, there's a
This
quote.
is what we're doing, Tom. We're trying to inform people so that the people who are suffering, the people who, because look, I've been through stuff, you've been through stuff. We're here talking about this, not to, boost our egos, but to extol a message that has benefited both of us. Our lives have changed from this.
Why do you think we're so passionate about Stoicism? I think what we've got to understand is that there's a reason why, because we didn't just come up with this overnight. Obviously, it's been months and months and years in the training of learning to think this way, and I still fall short some days.
Yeah,
and I'm sure you do as well. I think the thing is, we're thinking this way because we've both been through like some tumultuous mental health crises, which I think, for me personally, I don't know about you, came down to not taking my responsibilities. Because at one point, I was gambling a lot, I was depressed, I was drinking like so much every day to try and get rid of my troubles. I was not doing any work, I fell behind at university. And I think what caused it was this kind of societal attitude of it's all right to do this. Like you're just in a bit of a hole. Yeah. Come out of it. Time will tell. But you can't just rely on time. Time is a healer, of course. But you have to rely on yourself and like almost slap yourself back into action. Because when you realize how short life is by reading the Stoic works, and you ask questions like Seneca does in The Shortness of Life, like wait till the end of your life, hold an audit of everything you've done. Have you achieved life to the full? You'll look back on this period of your life and you'll think, wow, could I have done something more here? I was lying around in bed gambling on my phone. Could I have gone out for a run then? That's physically possible. I have legs. But why couldn't I go for a run? You know what I mean? And you would realize how much value your body parts have and your mind has if you didn't have them. Like if I didn't have arms right now, I would be fucking sorely missing them. But I've got them here right now so I can lift weights. And it's the idea of accepting your privilege with your physical body and accepting the advantages that you have over like nature in a way, and taking them and using them while you still have them, because one day these arms won't work so well and they simply won't. So why not take the opportunity now? And I think a lot of people would argue what you're saying is this kind of like alpha bullshit. What would you respond to that? It's like kind of alpha male toxic masculinity. What would be your response to that?
Controversial territory here.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people, I think there's a lot of characteristics of the alpha male that are very desirable, like being there when your family needs you the most, having that self-confidence. It's not arrogance, it's self-confidence. It's having the ability to speak out for what you believe in, about putting yourself out there, exposing yourself to new ideas, to new people, and also just being resilient as well. And I'd like to talk about what you were just talking about, using our privilege. I think that's important to get the right perspective. We need to, I know it's quite cynical, but we need to look at people who don't have arms and legs. We need to look at people who don't have the privileges we do in our society in the United Kingdom. We need to look to these, like the African continent, and look at the type of lives they're living. And we should see our privilege. And the Stoics said we should use our privilege not in vain. We need to, the fact we've got this privilege, we've got a duty to use this privilege for the betterment of society, because not everyone has this privilege. And if we just waste it, then there's plenty of people who could be using this privilege to better the universe. And I think another thing with when things have gone wrong in my past, you always get a good sight of things in hindsight. And when I look back to in first year, we've had a similar experience. We both lived a hedonistic lifestyle, and this is the thing in our society. It's so normalized to go out in freshers, drink every night, smoke, drugs, etc., do all this stuff over and over again until your body can't take it. And I'll tell you that now, anyone who's going into first year, if you're watching this, don't follow the crowd. Be the strongest people are the people who stand out and actually restrict their drug intake, their drinking intake. That's a sign of a true champion, in my opinion, not following the crowd. And
this message as well isn't for everyone. That's another thing Seneca actually says in this letter. He says that this message isn't for everyone because it takes a lot of guts and it takes a lot of high spirit to do these things, to actually stand up and make changes. And both me and Magnus, we're not at all perfect ambassadors of Stoicism, and we'll slip up a lot and we'll do a lot of mistakes, and we're not here on our high ground saying this stuff. We're just talking as a general conversation of the men that we hope to one day become. I'm sure you agree with that. I think what you've got to realize is this kind of mentality is not a conventional mentality. This kind of like striving for excellence is a result of philosophy. And a lot of people would say, why are you striving for excellence? What's the point? Why not just live your life as it comes? But then once again, I would remind those people who say that stuff, look in the mirror and realize that right now you're fucking whatever age, but you will be in a coffin one day. And it's this optimism and the pessimism, once again, the cynicism of life. But it's not, it's just the fact. It's the facts that one day...
You're going to be a skeleton. You're going to be a skeleton, man.
Ashes to ashes. And it's not something to be scared of. We don't need to be scared of that. We need to embrace it. It's almost like the biggest call to action ever. I've got this coin
Get
right
that
here.
coin out.
I want to show you. So it's the Stoic idea of memento mori. I'll just show you here. It's got a little skull. Memento mori in Latin means remember death. And on the back of this coin, it says, you could leave life right now. And that's not a joke. You could literally leave life right now. I could end this call with Magnus, walk out on the street to go and get a bagel and get hit by a car. And that isn't an overstatement. That could happen, and that would be it. So you have to squeeze value out of your time, like juice out of a lemon, in my opinion. What do you think to that, Magnus?
Spot on, yeah. I think it's always important every day. That's what Seneca did before he went to bed. He'd contemplate his mortality every day, and that's one of the main tenets of Stoic thought. They believe that it's not about dwelling on death. It's not about worrying about death. It's about remembering that our life is short, remembering our life is finite, and using that as a call to action, as Tom said. Using that as a way of motivating ourselves not to procrastinate, not to worry about other people's opinions. Because guess what? If you look back in 80 years' time and think, God, I didn't do anything because other people were judging me, and then you're on your deathbed. And that's what an activity you can do is think, if you were going to die right this second, what would you say? What would you say you wish you did? And you spend 30 seconds saying that. What did I wish I did more in my life? And once you've done that, write it down. And that's what you need to do right now. That's what I do anyway. I think if I'm going to die right this second, what would I wish my past self did? And I'll do that action now, that's a good little exercise. But what I would say as well is the people who flatline through life, the people who don't have any trauma, they coast. Yeah. Those people are the people who don't amount to anything. The people who go down and plummet and have had their crises, then those are the people that actually reach the peaks of life, because they know what it's like to plummet to hell. And they know that, they shouldn't take anything for granted, and they need to seize every moment. They've learned the value of life through that hell. And that's why I advise people to put themselves through hell so that they can reach the peaks of life and actually achieve a purpose, because purpose is the most analgesic and most great thing in our lives. It's the best thing we can achieve in our lives, purpose.
Just and everyone has, what you said, Magnus,
everyone has their own purpose.
About amounting to something. I like this idea a lot. But when I think of amounting to something, I don't know about you, I don't think in terms of fame, money, status, because these things, the Stoics go on and on to say, these things are temporary. So fame, money, and status isn't important in the long run. When I think of amounting to something, I don't think of the classic Western sense of having a Ferrari and turning around with like some gold watch on. What I think is having a really strong mental health position, having a strong body. I think it was Plato who said it's a shame in this life when a man can never see the true beauty of his body. I strongly believe that as well. I think you should strive for physical and mental excellence, and also to have amazing relationships with people around you as well. That's important. Friendship is one of the key tenets of life, having great friends. These are the three for me that are most important, these three purposes here. And obviously philosophy being the fourth biggest overarching one that ties it all together. But when I think of making it, I don't think in the traditional Western hustle sense. I don't know what you think about this, but I generally think in terms of living a life that's in accordance with nature, as the Stoics would say. And I don't think that's another misconception of Stoicism, that people watching this might misread what we're saying to think you're kind of really ambitious in one way or another. You're not very humble. You're highly ambitious. What would you say in response to that and Stoicism?
So the first point, talking about ambition, anyone can be ambitious. Anyone can, and the thing is, a lot of people who have come from humble backgrounds and have reached the heights of success, whatever your metric for success is. Obviously, mine and Tom's is not the conventional fame, money. Those people said that they're nothing special. There's nothing, and we have this entitlement in our society that we're this special, noble child who was meant to, who's always destined to reach the heights of success. But anyone can do it. If you have a certain mindset, once you have a certain mindset, and if you read Stoicism, if you read self-help books, if you invest in your mental health, your actions will follow naturally. And that's how you reach the heights. And anyone can do it. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how disadvantaged you are. If you read and invest enough into yourself, you can reach that. And I try and tell myself that. I try and tell myself that my privilege, my aspirations have to be earned. I've got to put in the work to get that. I'm not entitled to anything. And what was the other question that you asked? You talking about my metrics for success? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, the metrics for success. Is it how do you measure your success as a person? Is the question I'd ask.
I think what you said about friendship is pretty important, because if you visualize a world with no people in the world, if you were the only person in the world, that would be pretty lonely, wouldn't it? That'd be a lonely place. There'd be no point in life, would there? We're social animals, as Aristotle said. We're social animals, and we are. Like, without people, we can't rationalize our thoughts. There'd just be no purpose to life. So obviously that's the main one. And I'd say having a purpose for me is a big thing. And if you've got something that you can wake up every day, and because if you don't have a purpose, and in first year I had no purpose, and that's what caused me all the problems, because I would just wake up and go through life like a sleepwalker. I wouldn't have anything that would tie me down. I didn't enjoy my course, so I had nothing apart from going out and drinking, and that's not the purpose, is it? So I'd say having a purpose is a big one for me, and just enjoying like the small things as well, just like going on a walk, going on a run, experiencing life, looking around, like just the basics, and just having a strong mental health. Like that's seriously it. And obviously the thing about money is a difficult one, because a lot of the Stoics were rich. So, there's a bit of hypocrisy there.
Apart from Epictetus, of course.
Epictetus, but I suppose he wasn't a slave forever.
No, he wasn't. Well, money's a tool, isn't it? It's a tool.
It's necessary. It's a necessary evil, though. Should we talk about that? Should we talk about it in a modern sense? Because a lot of people in ancient times, in antiquity, they were self-sufficient because they were working on their crops, and they could sustain their life. But we need money in our society. So let's talk about it in a modern sense, Tom, because this is a bit of a difficult one, isn't it? It's important to have money to give yourself a better chance at life. So what's your opinion of that?
Well, I've read a lot of modern Stoic texts and ideas written by authors who have been around our times, and they talk about. So the Stoics originally, like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, they talked about indifference. And the idea of an indifferent is something that we shouldn't care about. And money was listed as one of those indifference. Modern Stoics like to look back and reanalyze this to say preferred indifference. So money is a preferred indifferent. The idea being it's better to be indifferent to it if you can be. But if you need it, which you will at certain points of your life, it's preferable to not crave after it. And that's what you should aim for, to not crave or obsess about money. But you should definitely see it as a responsibility and a duty, because let's be honest, you're not going to be able to raise a family. You're not going to be able to support yourself physically and mentally if you don't in some way go and get an income. And that, obviously, as you said, Magnus, we can't all work as like sharecropper farmers now. We can't all work as this or that, because it was all agricultural back then, of course. You have to own land really nowadays to work as a farmer, and there's a very select group of people who can work on farms as like a hired staff. So the question is now, using the modern world as the apparatus that we're walking around, the environment, how can we use that environment to better our mental and physical health? And money is going to be a part of that in some way or another. But if that money, in my opinion, comes to overshadow your mental and physical goals, and it overshadows your mental health, that's when you're in a dangerous place, because obsession over money is just as addictive as obsession over something like cocaine. And obsession over money might seem like a good obsession to have because you make more and more and more, but then it takes away your time as well. Seneca talks about this idea of time versus money. He says that if you go to a market and you want to get a lettuce, you have to exchange a coin for that lettuce, the coin being time. So for every piece of lettuce you buy, the lettuce being money in this abstract concept, you have to exchange your time for that lettuce. And it's the idea of, if you spend too much time obsessing over making money, you've wasted a great deal of your life on something that isn't meaningful. It isn't helping other people. It isn't a higher purpose. It is just a self-driven purpose, which isn't helping on a wider scale in the idea of cosmopolitan Stoicism. Do you agree with that kind of concept?
I do, yeah. And I actually know someone, I'm not obviously going to name them, but I know their dad saved up all his life to retire and go on these dream holidays, and he was quite a prudent saver. And then he was a very healthy person, never smoked, never drank, and then he died. He contracted terminal cancer, and he just died. And he had like over £1 million in his bank, and he didn't spend any of it. But it just shows, like, he had in the last 2 years of his life, he just had to spend it all quickly. And it just shows, like, what's important is your life, because if you suddenly contract terminal cancer and you've got all this money means nothing. Money's a means to an end. It's not an end.
Exactly. Well, yeah. The thing is, when you think about life, I don't know what you feel about this, but I think my purpose being on this planet is to leave it, when I do pass away, as a better person or making the world a slightly better place than when I came. I think if I come and tread on this planet, I should tread lightly, and I should give something back to the world that gave me a host's place to live, the world that gave me opportunities to enjoy friendship, to enjoy family, to enjoy all these things. I can give back to that planet which was so kind to me at times, and give something better. So that's why I kind of pursue Stoicism, because of all the ideologies out there to have, I think Stoicism is the one, because instead of taking, you give. You give through philosophy, and you give through energy most of all, because I've noticed this, when you spend time with people after having a more stoic attitude rather than a hedonistic attitude, it wears off in a positive effect on the people around you. Not to everyone, and not to get in this position where we're like, this is superior or inferior, because Stoicism is all about not pinning these terms on things. It's not good or bad, but positive energy does breed positive energy. So as above, so is below. So when you think about the positive vibe that you can put on people's life with this rational way of thinking, it could actually really help people. And you've transferred it to me, I've transferred it to you, you've transferred it to your friends and family, and hopefully I have in the same way. We've got to be humble about it, because it's not like we're some kind of prophets. Once again, we are just ordinary lads preaching and embodying a message that we believe in. And would you say it's mostly to help yourself as well? You study Stoicism?
So the first book I bought in Stoicism was actually, I've got it just here. And I'm thinking you've got this book, Tom. The Daily Stoic.
Yeah.
That's the first book I bought. And I bought that book out of necessity. I didn't buy it. I had to learn how to control my mental health, because it was out of control. Mine was a means of survival. I didn't have a choice. I didn't do it for leisurely reading. I genuinely, like 2 years ago, I was reading it and analyzing it and writing all this. I've still got the file in which I was writing all the little information down. And to be honest, that book really started me off on this Stoic journey. And to be honest, you get to a point in your life where you're that screwed up that you need something. You need to start learning and helping yourself, because there's no alternative. And what you were saying about people who you hang out with and how they affect you. You know, the Stoics talked about internalizing things. Also, you know, not worrying about external factors and just worrying about internals, the things we can control, like our opinions, our attitude, our actions. These are things we can control. But in my opinion, the Stoics missed out on, and maybe because their ineptness in neuroscience or psychology, obviously it's a modern phenomena, isn't it? So I'd say they didn't really talk much about the people who hang out with you. Obviously, Plato talks about a nourishing soil, and people are like soil; they either nourish you. But I think one thing that the psychologists have really kind of pioneered in the past 120 years is the people you hang out with are the people who it's who you are. And there's a maxim called Goethe's maxim, and he says, "Tell me with whom you consort with, and I will tell you who you are." So, and he talks about the 5 closest people in your life are who you are. There's no sense of self. There's no such thing as the self. It's about who you hang out with, because me and Tom here are having a conversation about intellectual things. We're talking about things that are stimulating my mind. Whereas if you're talking to someone who's hedonistic, who doesn't have a great attitude towards life, the perimeters of the conversation will be totally different. They're not going to be engaging in a conversation about stoicism, about mental growth. They're going to be talking about, and they could be talking about how many drinks they, put down last night, or how many girls they've slept with in the past month. That's the type of conversations you're having, and that's all and good. And like we all love a conversation like that now, every now and then. Everyone loves a gossip. Let's not, like, we're not perfect beings, but if you hang out with people like that all the time, they're just going to completely like destroy you, and they're going to bring you down.
Well, Seneca says in his letters, what do you think of this? That you should spend time. Or he says entirely, but obviously to a modern audience, we can't take absolutes from Stoicism.
Yeah. And the Stoics weren't perfect, were they? They obviously
weren't perfect either. There's all these flaws they have.
We're both humans. That's the thing. That's why it's so relevant, because they're humans and we're humans, and they're imperfect like us. They're not like some higher being.
Yeah, it's not like a god speaking down. It's a human speaking to another human. And this is just a side point. I'll get back to my original point. But whenever I read a Stoic book, it's like having a conversation with some of the wisest people who've ever lived. So it's like I'm sat with these friends. We couldn't call them friends. You'd have to be
wise elders.
To say that maybe, but. Start talking to these people who have a huge influence on my life, like the wise people who've gone, and their words are immortal now. So they've done something so good with their life that they've passed it on to me and to you and to millions of people. And going back to my original point about friends and your point, Seneca says you should hang around entirely with philosophers. Obviously, he didn't use the word hang around, but his idea is that to live the proper life and find eudaimonia, as the Stoics call happiness, you should consort mainly or almost entirely with like-minded people who think about the world through your lens, because it's dangerous to spend time with people who think about the world in a less rational way, because it will bring you down to a lower level. What do you think is that kind of idea?
So some people are more rational than other people, and rationality requires training. And we're all born pretty irrational. We're all apes with cognitive faculties added on top of us.
Not wrong.
And some people who do not invest in themselves the preponderance of their irrationality outweighs their rationality. So if you hang out with irrational people, they're more likely to be emotionally turbulent and all over the place. And emotions permeate our souls so much. So yeah.
Well, to be fair, we could wrap it up on that, because I think that's a good concept to end on.
So let's just conclude. So be careful who you hang out with, because they affect who you are. Don't follow the crowd. Be yourself. Be true to your values, because they always shine through. And Tom, what would you say?
Don't pray to the gods. Pray to yourself to have the strength for life to carry you through difficult situations, because I think there was a Stoic philosopher who said this. I don't know exactly who. I'll research it another time and keep you updated. But the idea is being that there's nothing better to see than a strong man or woman bearing their responsibilities and going through difficult times with strength. I think it is Seneca. I'm gonna hedge my bets on that. There's nothing better to see in this life than somebody dealing with tragedy and suffering with a strong mind, because it's so empowering to watch. Think about all the empowering stories we look at in our lives. It's all people who've been through shit's creek, and now they're sat here like with a smile on their face, hanging around with their mates, having a great time and enjoying life to the full. And they didn't let tragedy, which was inevitable all along from the start, derail them. The train keeps going. And I think that's such a fucking powerful place to be. You know what I mean? When you've...
Let's go, man.
Mastered.
Yeah, bro, honestly, that for me, that definitely like resonated with me. That's awesome. No, exactly. And we all love a underdog kind of story where, you know, like Rocky, where he comes and
we all
surmounts the obstacle. Yeah, no, that's awesome.
That is the best thing in life to do, to overcome obstacles, because what's the alternative? If you're not overcoming obstacles, you're smacking your face against them, crying because you've hit your head, and then rolling around on the floor.
Yeah.
Like, I think, was it Epictetus who said, when kids put their hand in the cookie jar, they cry and scream because their hand gets stuck.
Yeah.
All they need to do is let go of a few sweets and they can pull their hand out. The idea, stop expecting so much from the fucking cookie jar and just take your hand, and you'll be all right if you just lower your expectations. Yeah, it's been a good podcast, definitely.
It has been. We'll end it there then anyway. So subscribe to The Modern Stoic and Tom Murgatroyd, and subscribe to Magnus Davies. We're on Instagram, we're on YouTube.
We're everywhere.
Get it. Everywhere. We're everywhere. We're ubiquitous. All right, man. How do I stop recording?